Hey, welcome everyone to the June 2024 episode of FR Panorama. This is the ninth in our ongoing bi-monthly webinar series. I'm Larry Liberti, and together with my colleague Mario Alanis, as always, we'll be your hosts for today's webinar as we look into the concept of what core information is needed for a Reliance decision. We're now midway through our second year of these well-received webinars. And as always, registrants to today's seminar represent a global mix of pharmaceutical company representatives, regulatory agencies, universities, NGOs, and patient and trade associations. This webinar was created to help stakeholders gain a practical understanding of how to implement and just refine their use and consider the use of what we call facilitated regulatory pathways. We have a special focus, as you know, on Reliance. FR Panorama, in fact, is an educational program of the RUD Foundation. The RUD Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is the sponsor of also the FR Path project. We're also most grateful for the ongoing support provided by MSD for the FR Panorama series. The input and guidance from our advisory committee, topic experts, and past participants continually help us to shape the content of these informative and practical webinars. As a reminder, all of our prior webinars and this one are archived on the frpath.org website. While we all want to ensure that an effective and efficient decision is being made using Reliance, we've seen that there is diversity across regulatory agencies with regard to what kind of information they require to support their decision. Some of this may be related to legal requirements, some maybe to historical approaches that they've been using, and some where new approaches are being tested and developed. Well, this diversity means that there's room for a conversation around alignment of the kinds of documents and data that are at the heart of what is needed to make an informed Reliance decision. Now, how much emphasis should be placed on things like the CTD, on public assessment reports, on the CPP, and other resources? Is the detailed review of some of these informative, or is it redundant? Well, this is actually our chance to delve into these questions. But before we explore the topics for today, I'd like to introduce to you my colleague and co-host, Dr. Mario Alanis.
Thank you very much, Larry, and hello to everybody. Larry, it's always great to participate in these webinars. As usual, today we have a fascinating group of colleagues who are here to share their knowledge and experience on a very interesting topic. Indeed, Larry, today's issue, I believe, is at the heart of many of the discussions about Reliance. For example, it is quite common and often that we hear regulators stress the need to have access to an unredacted assessment report. Well, is it really necessary to have the full redacted? What core information is needed and is not available in the public report? How can the public assessment reports be complemented with the questions and answers, with the sameness declarations? Well, there are many issues very interesting. I'm sure we will have a great discussion. So, Larry, let's get started.
Very, very good. Thanks, Mario. As usual, today's session will last 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we hope that you'll find it to be a great use of your time. Please feel free to suggest questions in the chat box. You'll see a comment box, and we'll do our best to monitor these and to pose these questions to our guests during the panel session right at the end. So let's dive into the topic of what core information is needed to make a well-supported Reliance decision. I'm so very thrilled to introduce our three presenters today. Today, each will share with us their informed experiences when it comes to determining the kinds of information that best support a Reliance decision. First will be Isabelle Coleman from Merck, who will address this topic from the point of view of driving for a sustainable and agile reliance process, followed by Dr. Neil McCauslane from the Center for Innovation and Regulatory Science, who'll do a deep dive into stakeholder experiences and expectations of information to support reliance decisions. And then Fabricio Carneiro de Oliveira, talking about key information to support a reliance decision, and specifically the Anvisa experience. So I'd like to hand it over to Mario to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Larry. Our first speaker, as Larry had mentioned, is Isabel Colmine-Poulard. She's the head of Global Regulatory and Scientific Policy at Merck, and in her position, she's involved with many international pharmaceutical associations, including IFPMA, IREG, EFPMI. Please join me in warmly welcoming Isabel, who will share with us thoughts around diving for a sustainable and agile reliance process. Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this kind introduction. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfect.
Okay, and then I'm trying to put, yes, thank you very much for the slides. So it's a great pleasure to be there today, and I welcome everybody from around the world except Antarctica, maybe, in this session. My name is Isabel Colmine-Poulard, and I will represent today the EMA focus group on reliance. It's a cross-industry representative that is meeting regularly with the EMA, so the European Medicine Agency. So we have developed this slide in joint conjunction, and we have also organized with EMA a webinar on March 19 that you may be able to watch again if you navigate on the EFPIA, the European Association website. For today, I wanted to present the outcome of some work we have been doing. So this EMA, so European Medicine Agency focus group on reliance, has been established for about a year to facilitate implementation of unilateral reliance based on EMA as a reference agency in a very open and collaborative manner. So we discuss about how reliance is implemented and how it can be even more facilitated. For that purpose, last year, the industry conducted a survey with its member companies, aiming at understanding the use of the European Medicine Agency as a reference agency, but also identify the documents that are used and their application in the implementation of reliance for new marketing authorization application. And also, lastly, to harmonize and streamline implementation to advance an efficient use of reliance. Because we believe that efficient use of resource, streamlined management of regulatory submission and global supply is ultimately a goal that we should have, all of us, to have ultimately a timely access of products to patients. So what was this survey? The survey on use of unilateral reliance over the past 2 years was conducted with 70 countries. And it was with our member companies, and we asked a few questions around the use of reliance over the past 2 years to member companies. We obtained 42 responses, and we could see that in 71% of cases, EMA had been used as the reference agency. There were also other instances like national member states, of course, but 70% at least used EMA. So it's a very huge success and very high number, which is explained also by the availability of public documentation from EMA and transparency in their centralized procedure. It's also demonstrated that there is an absence of consistency in the list of documents that were required. So you can see that we had prepared a checklist of 13 documents. It's not an exhaustive list. And we asked our member companies, so did you provide these documents? Were they used for unilateral reliance? And we could see, you can see the order of magnitude of use of those documents in the implementation of Reliance, both in terms of number and type of documents. So it's a bit tiny, but I will develop on the next slide. So especially, we can see that it's usually based, and it's not a surprise, it's usually based on the provision of CPP, which is an old but still vivid Reliance tool, and approval letter. So in 84% of the case, so the CPP is requested by default and used in conjunction with other documents. And it was also shown that in 83% of cases, more documents are requested in addition, with up to 13 documents to apply Reliance. So these 13 documents, it's not an exhaustive list. You may have even more documents, and those documents can be used also for other purpose, importation or registration. So they are also standard documents used for registration, but there are quite substantial number of documents which are requested in addition to the basics, GMP, approval letter, and CPP. So let's dive in to understand what can be used, and specifically focus on the documents that are generated alongside the EMA centralized procedure in their way to review marketing authorization application. On this screen, you can see that there is a time availability. This is important also to consider, because this can also impact what is available by when to apply Reliance. And you can see all the documents output that can be used. And we as industry have further identified their purpose, the challenges, their opportunities for each of these documents, taking into account our lessons learned, but also their timing of availability. And we have also put through some further recommendation to avoid some redundancies and streamline unilateral Reliance pathways based on EMA. So you can see on the screen that at the beginning you have the CTD submission, then you have some interim phases with at day 120, the first round of question, followed by a second round at day 180, then followed by subsequent possible, if needed, a round of list of outstanding issues with subsequent questions, which may occur but not necessarily applicable. Depends if there are a lot of rounds. And then coming to the CHMP final consolidated assessment with the solidified benefit risk based on the overall scientific evidence provided in the course of the continuum of the question and answer. And also the CHMP opinion, which is basically giving the positive opinion of the CHMP, which is the broad rapporteur, but CHMP member also alignment across the decision. And afterwards, after more or less 67 days, you get the approval, which is the European Commission decision, which makes the legally binding approval. And then you have at the end, after it is checked by the manufacturer, the publication of the public assessment report, which is called European Public Assessment Report, or EPAR. Outside of this centralized procedure, I will also complement. You can, of course, get a CPP at whatever time point when it's approved. And you have also the possibility now to also explain what are the difference between the original dossier and the dossier you submit to your relying country. And this I will also explain further. So the recommendation that we have put through is that we consider at the center of this picture, you can see in the round middle, blue dark, we consider that these are the source documents that are really legitimate and are appropriate to really apply Reliance. These are the GMP certificate for the GMP status of the sites, but also the approval letter, which is the binding proof that your application is approved, together with the CTT package, of course, which gives all the details, and the EPAR, which is publicly available and which is reflecting EMA final scientific evaluation and in conclusion with the full benefit risk assessment. All of these documents are publicly available, except the CTD for sure, which is filed by the applicant, and easily accessible either on EMA website, this is for the EPAR, or on the EC website where you can file all approvals, and may not need further legalization. Other documents can be used also as alternative Reliance tools, especially the CPP, because it confirms registration status, marketing status, GMP status. So it could be also something that you may use alternatively. The final assessment report can be used as well if you believe that you do not have sufficient information in the EPAR, which is publicly available. Though you have a lot of information when you compare the public information, the EPAR and the final assessment report, you have already most of the information. But the final assessment report then can be provided and represent the final scientific discussion and conclusion of the EMA committees. As per, I don't know if you have noticed, but the EMA has published in their post-authorization guidance a very interesting updated Q&A from March this year, where basically what they say is that when sharing some documents with an NRA for Reliance, when sharing an inspection report or a final assessment report, we should ensure compliance as applicant with the EU legislation, and we are legally liable to it. And this EU legislation is notably on the protection of personal data, for example, the names of the rapporteur or the assessors, and also on commercially confidential information. That is why there is a specific process whereby we redact personal data and commercial sensitive information before to be able to exchange further information out. In complement to the CTD dossier, it's also the applicant responsibility to highlight any differences with the original dossier, especially for if there are different indications, different CMC information, stability zone, or whatever necessary difference in presentation, what should be highlighted to allow further regulator to choose whether or not to apply Reliance and to apply also a risk-based application of Reliance. So to do a average assessment of the difference that are highlighted, or to do a verification, so just high-level verification of the documents if it's exactly the same. For example, now each regulator has to choose whatever is best for its application of Reliance, depending on its priorities. But what we have agreed all together also is that some documents, and you can see that in the last circle, may be more duplicative than and may not be really necessarily needed. And those are especially all the interim assessment report, the Day 120, Day 180, and others, because they represent a snapshot of a conversation you have with the EMA at a certain point in time, but they don't represent the final overview of the outcome of the benefit risk and of the scientific evidence and final regulatory decision. They can be useful for sure for training and capacity building, but may not be very representing added value for a routine practice of Reliance. That's what we would like to convey, basically. Similarly, GMP certificate, you have the GMP status, so inspection report may not be needed if the GMP is ascertained by a PICS member, then inspection report may not be requested then in these circumstances, unless you may change the manufacturing site, and then you have also to justify with proper comparability, or you have to justify why you change, for example, the batch release. But I don't want to go into too many details. So, in conclusion, A core set of documents are really available from EMA as good outputs that can facilitate the application of Reliance. That's why EMA is still used as one of the big, the master choice, I would say, for applying Reliance. And you can see that some documents are really available. Publicly, so the GMP certificate, which is available in the EU DRA GMP database from EMA, the approval letter from EC, and the EPAR from EMA. We in industry, we have to also transparently share when there are differences between the original dossier and the dossier applied for Reliance. And that's why IFPMA has recently created a statement that can be used to highlight those differences and can be provided then as an application form together with the dossier. And other documents, of course, may be used as alternative, like the CPP, preferably in electronic format, which is the format now from EMA, but also final assessment report when EPAR is not legally accepted by the country. And again, those documents obviate further need for legalization when they are already available on website and publicly available, hopefully. So there is not one size fit all. For sure, flexibility and agility is key in the selection of documents, but we wanted to give a snapshot of the reflection that we have had together with EMA in this focus group. And I remain, then I will have to drop off, but we'll come back for in case of question at the end. So thank you very much for your attention today. And I leave to Lawrence for the next speaker.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Isabelle. That was just very clear and wonderful. I know that you have to drop off for a little while, but I just wanted a clarification. You know, you made a great case about the value of using the information from the EMA as the basis for Reliance decisions. And I believe, based on FR path assessments and others, that essentially everybody who does a Reliance decision at some point relies on EMA. However, in some countries, the laws and other approaches require that they look at more than one reference agency. They might have to look at 2, maybe 3 reference agencies. If that's the case, what recommendation might you have with regard to the kinds of documentation that would come from the other reference agencies other than EMA to kind of keep that package small and manageable, yet enough to make it a good quality decision?
That's a tricky one, because I think that for me to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 health authorities would not secure more, I think, the application. That's the first point I would like to make. So for me, the difference in between a verification and an averaged, in the end, it makes the average assessment easier for companies, because with the verification, you need 2 or more, and it's not so easy. Not so easy because usually, for sure, in first wave submission, which we still have, we apply for US and Europe registration. And for sure, to get the US assessment report is not so easy to get the unredacted assessment report. So this is one of the difficulty we have right now when we are asked to provide 2 health authorities. So in the end, we prefer to apply for average than for verification. That being said, I think that we have seen that there are a lot of new reference agency with the WLA coming also from WHO, and there are more aspirations also, more collaboration. So I think that we can select also some national European member state. We can select also, I think, other Swissmedic, Australia, provided Japan, but provided that there is no language barrier. So that's why I believe that for others it's less popular, I would say, because of this length of time to get some official documents unredacted as appropriate.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Again, we understand that you need to drop off and perhaps can come back in just a little while. again, thank you very much for that very, very clear and illustrative presentation. We have a comment that's come in, and it's just a generic comment about staying in touch with us. And we all have LinkedIn pages. If you'd like to stay in touch with us via our LinkedIn pages, we're more than happy to follow up with you if you have specific questions. Great. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, we're all familiar with the Center for Innovation in Regulatory Science, CIRS, and the groundbreaking research that they've conducted to support regulatory system strengthening, efficiency, and effectiveness. And from the days that I was involved with CIRS as part of the CIRS team, we often were challenged by our diverse stakeholders to provide some guidance as to what types of documentation were critical in informing a Reliance decision. There's so much information available, as you've heard, that the challenge of an organization making a Reliance decision is not to, what I would say, go down the rabbit hole. In other words, as you saw in those concentric circles, how do you focus on what is important? And so I think it's important that we identify those key information documents, as Isabel was talking about, especially those that describe the outcomes of those prior regulatory decisions. And she's introduced us to those concepts. But let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. And leading the way into the research into this question has been CIRS. We're pleased today to have my colleague, Dr. Neil McCausland, the scientific director at CIRS, who's here to share with us some of the most recent findings from CIRS research and how that research can help us get a better understanding of what supports a Reliance decision. So just a reminder of all the great research that CIRS has done is available at their website at www.cirsci.org. And with that, Neil, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Larry, for that introduction. It's really great to hear the previous presentation, but also thank you for letting people be aware that what I'm just about to present is available on the website. So thank you. Possible to have the first slide. Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. What I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is really go to this title of a deep dive into stakeholders' experiences and expectations of information to support Reliance decisions. Now, really, I'm going to be focusing on these three publications that have just come out, and I have to really, give credit to the regulatory team within CIRS. That's Magda Bujer, Adam Kermid, and Juan Lara Ramon, for the work that they've done in order to produce these. But these are available on our website, so what I'm really giving you is very much at a high level. What I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about information sources to support a Reliance decision, and then talk a little bit about stakeholder expectations. I think all of you who are on this call are probably pretty familiar with the definitions, but I thought it was really important to put this in because one is, if you take the official definition, the act of reliance is whereby the regulatory authority in one jurisdiction takes into account and gives significant weight to the assessment performed by another regulatory authority or trusted institution. So that really means that information needs to be available from another agency in order to be able to leverage that to take account of it in the review. And I think it's really important that, because this isn't about a rubber stamping approach or exceeding responsibility, because each agency is going to be responsible and accountable for the decisions they make. But it doesn't mean to say that they can't rely on decisions, assessments, and information of others. But of course, it's where does that information come from, and what depth of review do agencies put in on it. And it's also important, as Martin Harvey has often said from EMEA, that reliance and collaboration are a 21st century regulatory tool. It's about for all agencies, irrespective of maturity or resource. So when you ask about how reliance can be achieved, if you take the WHO Good Reliance Practice, they really are emphasizing that national regulatory agencies, and that's why Isabel's comment at the end there about the new WLA ones, are encouraged to issue public assessment reports in a common language to document their regulatory decisions, and relying NRAs should use such reports as the primary source of information of assessments. But that means those documents really need to enable the relying agency to understand the decision that has been made and what was the basis of that. And interestingly, in the IPRP Q&A on Reliance, they talk about no Reliance model can be successful without the critical aspects of ensuring the documentation received for an application assessed by the National Regulatory Authority using Reliance refers to the same medical product. So again, there needs to be evidence base in relation to that. And I think that is something that is key in terms of why documentation being available from reference agencies is key. Now, one way of that, and we've talked about this, is what's available in the public that is already there. And of course, many agencies and all agencies that want to be a WL4 should be producing public assessment reports. One of the key is are they systematic, structured, standardized is another question. But I think that, as we see, there are very much different details, whether it's an EMEA, EPAR, an SBA from the FDA, or an OSPAR from Australia. Well, one of the things that CIRS was challenged with, and this was partly funded by FeeFarmer, was to have a look and say, well, for public assessment reports, could you look at what information is in there that a relying agency generally needs to review? And so CIRS undertook a study to look across, I think, 6 public assessment reports that were produced by EMA, FDA, Health Canada, Swissmedic, TGA, and Anvisa on the same products to see if we could identify, how well these do. And interestingly for us, in summary, as I said, the full report, it gives you the detail. Just looking at that we found that public assessment reports too, based on surveys, are generally not used in practice for Reliance in terms of what we're seeing in the official guidelines, and I'll come to that later, because they do not contain all the information needed for Reliance, particularly in the CMC space. But some reference agencies, of course, publish more than others, and information can, as Isabel indicated, be got from other types of public documents. So just looking at the public assessment report has to be taken in, that nuance has to be taken into consideration. So what we're seeing, and this is just for 2 of the agencies, of course, EMA is, as Isabel's talked about and even Larry commented on, is usually one of the primary reference agencies where their assessment is able to be utilized. I think what we can see in terms of those background documents of regulatory background, CMC, non-clinical, clinical, and benefit risk, if you look at the greens and the blue, you can see that there, for the majority of non-clinical, clinical benefit risk assessment and regulatory background, information seems to be available. But in the CMC area, there seems to be less information. So kind of the challenges that remain are limited availability of public assessment reports at the time needed, quality and completeness of the information, including clarity of what is redacted. And Isabel also explained why redactions have to happen. And also one of the things where, is about lack of training. And that's something that maybe we need to come back to at some stage on how public assessment reports can be used for Reliance, particularly in looking at things like benefit risk and the clinical side. But the current perspective, of course, in this is that when you look at, even if regulator Reliance is perceived as being a 21st century tool, transparency of decisions being made by the reference agency is key in terms of building that trust. But the information sharing is, of course, the thing that really enables Reliance to be successful. And in our 2022 survey of agencies, we find the top challenges by agencies wanting to use a Reliance model was the access to assessment reports. And that's really kind of the focus for today's discussion. When we look at this from a particular aspect in relation to a survey that was done in 2019, but I think when we talk to agencies, a number of these are still there. The enablers, of course, are the availability of unredacted reference agencies assessment reports, the availability of the list of questions from the reference agency. or the post-marketing commitments, e.g., what is it they found, what did they ask for afterwards are key. It's also important to have that communication line, either whether it's with the reference agency or with the applicant, in order to answer the questions. So those are kind of enablers of information that help drive an abridged review, and this is what we're more or less talking about. And as Isabel said, that's kind of the avenue that most companies, applicants go down. The barriers, of course, is not receiving an unredacted reference agency assessment report from the applicant, resistance from applicants to actually apply for the abridged review process because they can't meet the requirements for the supporting documents. But then, of course, there's that need for the transparency from the reference agency's decision-making processes point of view. And I think more agencies are getting there, but as more agencies become reference agencies, it's going to be important in terms of understanding. And also, if the benefit risk assessment is not detailed enough, particularly when you're doing that risk-based approach for your own local population. Of course, differences in regulatory requirements and the reliance on the work conducted by other agencies does still need this mindset shift within agencies. So just focusing in on a little bit on stakeholders' expectations, and when I'm doing this, I'm really doing it from the surveys we've done, looking at it from the agency's perspective. Work that we've done in terms of looking at guidelines specifically, and again, this is partly funded from the Vietnamese Agents Trade Association, was really looking at how could we look at agency guidelines and whether or not they are setting the expectations. Because in a way, what agencies or what applicants need to submit, if it's detailed in the guidelines and detailed in a way that people can understand, then of course getting to the right information is going to be key. All I can say is that, you know, when we looked at this across a number of countries in Asia, and also in Saudi Arabia, was that there's no doubt the core details are there for a number of agencies that are now formalized from a Reliance perspective. In the past, of course, CPP was used mainly for Reliance purposes, but now, of course, more agencies are formalizing their processes. And we can see that is allowing us not just in the core details in terms of how long it takes, the type of products, but also what the eligibility criteria are. And interestingly, of course, some go into much more detail in relation to the eligibility criteria. And I think this is key. The more that an understanding or more that's documented enables a better facilitation of what is required. And that is also going towards the documentation requirements. You know, how detailed should these be? And this is just across, and these agencies in a kind of tabular form is trying to know whether, you know, what in terms of is needed in terms of the assessment reports. And then when you look at the second line there, you can see all of them are looking for unredacted Q&A, full Q&A, as well as the type of format or the CTD modules, and of course, in relation to the stability study reports, which of course, in those cases, may differ from what was the reference agency looked at. But I think the one thing that doesn't come clearly from the documentation, should we say, and the guidelines, is actually what is the depth and scope of the review. And I think that's something that, in a way, is one of the challenges in terms of, yes, we're asking for the documentation, but how does it get utilized? So a survey was done, again, this was partly funded from a grant from IFPMA, in relation to an agency survey done end of last year in terms of what is regulatory agencies' approaches and rationale for requesting documents to support an abridged Reliance review. So this is really a very small subset of what the agencies that you saw from Isabel's survey by industry. And this is the countries here in terms of their perspective. So when you look at it, and unfortunately the animation hasn't worked on this one, so I don't know if that can be sorted, but when we look at the question in terms of what types of information do you generally require from non-public documents for an abridged Reliance review, we asked across the agencies in terms of scientific advice, Q&A, assessment reports, risk management plans, list of outstanding questions, post-marketing commitments, updated common technical documents, and summary meetings for the meetings held with applicants. The actual please go to the briefing and you'll see the detail behind here. But actually, when we looked at it across, we found that the documents required by the majority of authorities was the Q&A interim and final, assessment reports interim and final, risk management plans, the list of outstanding issues, post-marketing commitments. This information was generally required to be submitted as unredacted. And indeed, when we really wanted to ask the next question that was important for us was in terms of what sections of the non-public assessment reports are reviewed and how. We were really interested because one of the things is, yes, you're asking for the information, but are you doing a full review on it? Are you doing a selected review? Are you doing a checklist review? Depending on because of critical thinking that's required within agencies who are doing reliance review, is important, as Isabel also commented on. It's not an all or nothing, and not all reliance or all full. There can be bits where some can be more leveraged, and therefore it's a risk-based approach in terms of how detailed the review should be. And again, the full results are in the briefing, but just as a summary, the type of depth of the review information within the non-public documents during a reliance review that was quite mixed across the agencies, this cohort of agencies. But in general, clinical, benefit risk, and quality CMC sections are reviewed either fully or selectively. And again, I think that's dependent on the asset or the product for the particular market, particularly in relation to what needs to be done for the local population, whereas non-clinical is either not reviewed or is only reviewed if there's a query in terms of going through. So in terms of the outcome of the CRS recent CIRS study, I think the thing that's interesting is when we asked about the rationale for requesting non-public documents, it was really around to confirm sameness and to understand reference agency decision-making. You can see that the others there, of course, play a part, but those were the two key aspects in terms of the rationale. So just to finalize and finish off in my time, the summary is based on the results of the work that we did in 2023, agencies' expectations are often set out in guidelines and regulations, may include both PARs and non-public information. Public information may not have as detailed information in the CMC as required, but there are challenges in terms of the non-public, in terms of the depth that's required there and what is actually going to be utilized for. So just in finalization, the challenges highlighted by relying agencies are difficult in obtaining all the relevant non-public documents in a timely manner, lack of communication channels, and a lack of a clear and harmonized content of reference agencies, non-public information, and how these should be used specifically for Reliance. And with that, I'll hand it back to the chairs, Larry and Mario. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Neil. Great research, and it's wonderful that a lot of this information is available for people to review the briefings. I am sure all the participants and our guests are valuing very much how practical the presentations have been and the recommendations we have heard so far. It is my pleasure now to introduce our final guest, who's Fabricio Carneiro de Oliveira, who is General Manager of Biologics, Blood, Tissue Products, Radiopharmaceuticals, Advanced Therapeutic Products at Anvisa, the Brazilian Regulatory Agencies for Medicines. We have invited Fabricio today because Anvisa has worked very hard to create, follow up, and refine its approaches to use reliance pathways. Their experience have benefited Anvisa, particularly their new normative, I'm sure the 289, but it's also helping inform many other countries who are looking at what Brazil is doing. It is because of this experience that we are honored to have Fabricio share his thoughts on key information to support Reliance. Welcome again, Fabricio.
Thank you very much, Mario and Larry, for the invitation. I greet for the audience from the whole world that's seeing the presentations. And I will talk a little bit about our our experience in Brazil to create and to evolve, and the key aspects of a Reliance program that we are implementing now in Brazil. We are already implemented, but of course we are always trying to improve it. So the title of the presentation is The Brazilian Experience and the Core Information for the Decision. As Mario said, my name is Fabrício, and I'm a pharmacist working on Anvisa since 2005, almost 20 years of experience working here in many offices here in Anvisa. So just for the beginning, I think when we talk about Reliance, the first thing an agent that wants to work with a Reliance procedure must think is to have the regulatory convergence. So as you can see, Anvisa has regulatory convergence as a major value, and we have agreements with WHO, ICMRA, ICH, PICS, and IPRP. The goals is to fully assess the studies, data, and documents prepared to meet specific conditions for products to be commercialized in Brazil, but benefit from equivalent assessments already carried out by trusted regulators. The main goal is to strengthen the regulatory capacities, and then we can make better use of our limited resource, especially human resources. And try to avoid the duplication, expedite access to new medicines. But the main goal is to make the better use of the human resource, because of course, if you can use less time to review something that is already approved by a reference authority, you have more time to work with the submissions that are intended to be only for the Brazilian market. So, or the first submission is here in Brazil in some situations. So it can work with more time for these submissions. We have a very recent framework. We work with Reliance since 2018, but recently we have improvement in the guidelines. In 2022, we published the general criteria for the admissibility of analysis carried out by equivalent foreign regulatory authority through the Reliance pathway. And in September 2022, we published a temporary optimized Reliance assessment pathway as a pilot, so we could understand better how can we improve the Brazilian procedure for Reliance. And today, we have enforced since April this year, 2024, the normative instruction 289 that established the criteria for the Reliance assessment pathway for medicines, API, and biological products. So these are the framework. The RDC 750 was used as a pilot to collect some information for the final normative instruction that is enforced now. Here are some data from the pilot that we started to use since in September 2022. We have more than 450 submissions. We still have a backlog to be assessed, but mainly, especially for biological products that are my field, we have almost everything already assessed, but most of the submissions approved. For example, for initial authorization for biologicals, we have 4 approved products and 1 rejected. And for post-approval change, the most important impact for biological products, we have 192 submissions in the Reliance pathway approved, and by the other side, we have 37 not approved. So we try to learn, especially with these not approved submissions. What were the main reasons for not acceptance of the Reliance pathway? Especially the absence of the reference authority report. In this case, especially for CMC, as you could see, we had 37 submissions rejected to be used, to be assessed in the Reliance procedures. And especially for CMC, because some specific subjects for post-approval change do not, in some reference authorities, they do not release a report. So, of course, they will not be able to present the report because it's not released by the reference authority for some situations. So it's something that we try to address in the final regulation for Reliance in Brazil. The usage of not recognized reference authority, so we try to increase the number in the regulation, and then we are in a continuous process, evolution process to include more agents, considering the necessity of some agreements and memo of understanding, documentation exchange to include a new Reliance, a new reference authority to be using the Reliance procedure. And in some situations, it's not possible in the report, in the reference authority report, to confirm the approval condition or the sameness. So the reports do not have all the information that we need, or it's redacted, so we cannot see all the important information. We have some lessons in this pilot. Some companies experimented difficult to provide a report, especially for CMC post-approval changes, or for some agents, for example, they find some difficult to provide the reports, for example, from FDA in a reasonable time. So normally they request the regular assessment. So in this situation. So considering this, we include new agents in the list of reference authorities for Reliance, and we are continuing discussing with our International Affairs Office here in Anvisa to sign more memo of understandings, so we can be able to include new agents, and for some situations to present the possibility of approval letter of CMC chains, and with some additional information so you can understand what were assessed. So in this with this game, we will have the better number of approval for CMC. We include in the regulation the possibility to use the tool for new vaccines. In the pilot, we do not include this possibility. But when one of the lessons that we learned is even when we're not able to use the Reliance procedure, even in this situation, we note some benefits reported by the companies because they receive less questions after the initial assessment and have a reduced time for the conclusion. So even when it's not possible to use the Reliance procedure, the company may benefit to send us the reports they have available. We noted that, especially for biologics, it were not applicable for the first wave submission because, of course, we don't have any approval yet. So we received fewer Reliance requests for initial submissions in Brazil. But we could see by the end that we have for all the submissions, CMC and initial requests, a reduction from 30 to 50% in the total Anvisa assessment time as a yield. Here, the path in the normative instruction revision, the step one, it was the pilot that I talked a little bit about the numbers. Then we have a public consultation, and then the step three, it was the consolidation when we used all the experience that gained in the pilot and some suggestions that we received in the public consultation to have a better normative instruction as a main procedure. Here are the possible levels of Reliance. I think when you are creating a Reliance procedure, you must understand the better pathway applied for your agents, so we can vary from multiple recognition to an unilateral recognition. So in some countries, they accept the approval, in other countries. But Anvisa take the decision in this, when they studied their condition, the Anvisa situation, the number of people, and the national necessity to apply the unilateral reliance. So the unilateral reliance, of course, they have three kinds of possibilities. The simpler one is the sameness verification. So you will only confirm if the product is the same and then accept the assessment. The summary assessment, the abbreviated analysis, that the situation that we will assess, but with less with a less deepening eye, so we do not check everything. And the confirmation of applicability, that's the verified analysis, that is the way selected by Anvisa. So you will verify the sameness and confirm if the assessment is applicable considering the national conditions. So this was the procedure that were approved in Brazil. So we will confirm the applicability of the assessment outcomes of the reference authority considering the national councils. For example, I think it's easier to understand for a vaccine. For example, if you have, we had the approval of the malaria vaccine from WHO in the last years. But if someone tried to approve this product in Brazil, during the verification assessment, we will see that the Plasmodium that is prevalent in Africa, that where the product is being used, is different from the one that's prevalent in Brazil. So the assessment is not applied here in Brazil. So the main core of the assessment in the verification procedure is to check if the outcomes can be applied considering the national context. Here, just for information, the authorities accepted to Brazil. No big news here, but considering the pilot, we included the WHO for biological products that were not in the first in the RDC 750, and we include for all kinds of products, special medicines and biological products, the TGA, the Australian authority, as a reference authority too. But talking about the key comps, I think the most important thing is the product identity. So the main thing is to check the sameness, the essential characteristics of the product. If the product submitted to the local authority and the product approved by the reference authority, they must be essentially the same. And we use this word essential because it's not necessary to be exactly the same. It can be accepted some difference. But what should be the same to be considered for a Reliance problem, for procedure? The qualitative and quantitative composition must be the same. The dosage, the pharmaceutical form, the intended use, the manufacturing process, facilities, and the suppliers of pharmaceutical ingredients must be the same. And the quality of all excipients. For example, maybe you can use different excipients, but with the same level of quality. It's not necessary to be the same suppliers, for example. By the other side, for the active pharmaceutical ingredient, it's necessary to be the same supplier. And of course, maybe it can, some difference may be accepted, but we need to check if any potential difference, and it must be justified by the manufacturer. But one of the considering the regulatory principles, it's necessary for the companies to present the full dossier. So if we cannot consider the usage of the Reliance procedure, we will have all the documentation to be assessed, so we do not lose any time. And even when we accept the Reliance procedure, sometimes the reviewer can make understand it's necessary to check in detail some specific information. So that's why it's important the full dossier. The dossier must comply with the Brazilian regulation. It must be proof that the equivalence of the product, the sameness, demonstrating the similarity between the product approved by the reference authority and the one presented to Anvisa, and flexible allocation. The reliance can be applied for specific parts of the dossier presented, as requested by the requesting company or Anvisa assessment. For example, in some situations, if there is some difference, if the reference authority there is only one site, manufacturing site but in the Brazilian submission we have more than one, we can apply the reliance for the main core of the submission, the part that is the same submitted to the reference authority, but we will still need to check in full details the comparability, the inter-site comparability, for example. So we can apply the reliance for part of the dossier and review the other parts that are not the same, that have some difference from the reference authority approved product. Here, since its publication of the final regulation in Brazil, a final is not the best word, because of course we can still it's necessary to continue still evolving this resolution, these procedures in Brazil. So during the application, if we detect new necessities, we can of course change the regulation to have a better procedure here in Brazil. But since its publication, we have 27 submissions only, and we still are now checking the impact of the new regulation for the reliance procedure. And after a specific period of time, we can reassess and to understand if it's necessary to have some improvement in the regulation. And to finish my presentation, I will say a small summary of everything. The sameness is the most critical aspect for a reliance procedure. You must understand what you consider sameness and what can be different between the products. The sovereign is really, really important, especially to increase the confidence in the reviewer team. The reviewer must understand that they can ask questions if necessary. They keep all the sovereign to take a decision. In fact, they may take a different decision from the reference authority if they have data to support it. So it must be very clear for the review team that they keep up a complete sovereign during the assessing procedure, even when using a reliance pathway. The Brazil select verification as its reliance procedure, so we accept the report. We consider the report reliable, but we will check if all the conclusions can be applied considering the Brazilian framework and the local aspects. It's really, really important to have an open dialogue during the building of the reliance procedure to detect the improvement opportunities, and even after the approval of the framework, to continue to have this dialogue with the companies, because they will see previously than the agents the difficulties that they are facing during the reliance procedure. So if they are not using the pathway, we need to understand why and try to address this in new in the evolution of the resolution. It's a continuous work. The regulation is a live process, so we need to continuous understanding what can be improved in a reliance pathway. And to finish, as a final message, the continuous work to improving the report by the reference agents, it's a very, very important thing, because it will make it easier to confirm the sameness and other aspects for the agents that is accepting the Reliance, using the Reliance pathway. So maybe the reference author may be issue the reports faster and without many redacted items, so you can check the main aspects of the assessment and the main aspects of the products. But maybe in the future you can use a common system to share this information between the agents. For example, like the Cumulus project or the PQKMS system that they are being discussed on, so you can share the report resolve and redact, and the report will be available for the agents. It will not be necessary for the companies to share the information. It's a little bit, it's a challenge to implement a system like that, but it's under discussion, and it may be the solution for this problem regarding the availability of the reports and the information of the reports. So that's what I have to say to you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, excuse me, Fabrizio, that was great. I got the idea that you should actually write a manuscript and publish a manuscript about your experiences, because they're so rich and so directional that I think a lot of people would gain great experience from it. We had a couple of questions that actually you addressed during your presentation. One had to do with, can we find a standardized approach for sameness in terms of a format for the description? And I know that we've talked about this in our last seminar about 2 months ago. It is hosted on our website. We did think about, are there standard approaches? And you've touched on that, and that would be useful to be able to have standardization and to share the information well. And another one that you've touched on is the challenges of post-approval changes, which I think we're going to take up as a topic for one of our webinars, because it keeps coming up just as much as we've seen with regard to sameness. So very important concepts. I just wanted to touch on something, because you mentioned the concept of flexibility in process, which I think is very, very important. And Neil, when you did your surveys, this concept of being flexible in terms of assessing different types of data, how did that come out in your surveys, first of all, Neil? And then secondly, Fabrizio, how do you teach, and this was the other aspect that came out, was how do you teach your staff to be flexible? So Neil, I'll leave it with you first, and then Fabrizio.
Very interesting question, because I think it's really important from an agency point of view to, in a way, allow the reviewer to have that critical thinking in terms of the depth. I mean, the depth of review for particular items, but important that they don't go fishing, as they say, in terms of the questions really need to be relevant to the local population. But I mean, in the actual survey that we did last year, it was really mainly an aspect of what type of review do you do? We didn't really ask that question, but in previous surveys where we've been asking much more specifically in relation to what documentation and what review type, depending on the review type, whether you have flexibility built into thinking, that a lot of agencies, depending on their capacity and their capacity, can really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's enabled within the reviewer. But as I said, sometimes that if there's too much flexibility, it does create the types of questions that are being raised are not necessarily the ones that are, relevant to leveraging, the leveraging of the assessment report, or leveraging the decision, is much more using that as a kind of extra piece of information to ask more questions. So as I said,
right.
There's
You
a
go down
balance.
that rabbit hole we were talking about. You're right,
Yeah.
duplicating effort. Fabrizio, how do you train people to be flexible yet do what Neil says? Try to stay within the context of what's important.
I think it's a great challenge, because you will need to gain the confidence of people, and I think it came with this experience. when you implement the procedure in the beginning, the very beginning, normally the people will be more resistant to apply the procedure. And then when they will using the procedure in the real world and understand, okay, I have a question here, I can do this question, they stay more comfortable with the procedure. And I think it's something that will be naturally addressed. But the main thing is to keep this override for the reviewer and to have an open dialogue with them. So as a office head, I have always to have this conversation with the people. Okay, you can accept the Reliance, but if you feel are not comfortable, you can ask questions. It's not impossible. So I think it's something that will help the people to be more confident. So you can have this flexibility during the assessment.
Yeah, that's great. I see Isabella has been able to join us again, and we were just finishing up some conversation here about training and how do you help the reviewers understand where to focus their efforts and how to be flexible around it, because Fabricio said flexibility is important. What are your thoughts around this duality of being flexible around what you review and yet trying to adhere to the consistency of that core documentation that you had in the center of your circle?
Yeah, I think that it's a tough question also, but I think that first of all, the WHO Good Reliance Practice is always a way to go book, and it contains also a very good chapter about risk-based approach on how to apply reliance, and that basically informed reliance with purposeful documents is important. So that not one size fits all. So average assessment, you may need some documents, whereas for verification, you may need less, and balancing transparency with confidentiality in compliance with local regulation is also very important. And we have seen, I think, some regulators also evolve over time. So we could see, for example, Egypt that now has regulation very streamlined for reliance on post-approval changes that can be used as role model. I would say we have seen also some, and Egypt has said in the DIA Europe that by practicing, you also become more used to it. So you require less documents like this interim Q&A because this is used at the beginning for capacity building. But as long as your expertise in applying reliance grows, then you don't need it anymore. Same for Brazil. I think that Brazil, we could hear also in the DIA Europe that they have also adapted so that they understand perfectly that personal data may be redacted, as well as some commercial sensitive information. So this is also the agile way to go by practicing. But all in all, I think that this concept of informed reliance is very important. So request and apply, foster convergence of requirements as an enabler, and then select the appropriate documents that provide really purposeful information for what you need to do with it.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for your insights. We're right at the end of our session at this point. Now, I want to thank our speakers very much for their insights and for bringing up some very important concepts today and addressing our questions from our attendees. So, in fact, if we can, let's summarize a little bit about some of the key actions that we would recommend that you think about taking, because we always like to leave you with some key things that you could pick up and do tomorrow. So I'll turn it over to our colleague, Zach, if you could post those. So here's a couple of takeaway actions, and you've heard some of these already, that reference agencies should implement procedures to rapidly publish the content of the public assessment reports and to make other documents available as needed, subject to things like MOU. So how do we accelerate this process? Second, for the relying agencies, you need to be transparent about what kind of public and non-public information is needed from the reference agencies so that you understand why you want this information. So it's good for the companies. They can understand why you're requesting this. And then the other agencies that are providing the information understand why you're requesting this information. And as Neil said, the depth of the review can be flexible, right? And I think that's an important component. Number 3, for companies, you should be attentive to the agency's needs regarding non-public information, so that the relying agency can take advantage of the work and decisions of the reference agencies and to provide these in a timely way. So we have that theme of timeliness. How do we work to accelerate this? The 4th one is that agencies, companies, and other stakeholders should foster convergence of assessment requirements as an enabler of Reliance. We saw a couple of approaches to that today with regard to what are the core documents, the core approaches that should be considered. And finally, our last bit is we should strive to practice informed reliance with purposeful documents, avoiding duplication, balancing transparency with confidentiality, and compliance with local regulations of the agency or regional initiative. So thank you very, very much. The goals of these seminars is to leave you with ideas that we can think about how individually and how our organizations can act on those 5 bullets. So go back to the recordings, take a look at them, and see how you would actually implement those topics. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, August 27th. Tuesday, August 27th, when we'll take up the question, what does effective work sharing look like? So many regional initiatives and other work sharing initiatives have been going on. So we want to take a deep dive into looking at what brings those to the forefront. The registration will be available at the frpath.org website, and we'll do our usual email blasts. So remember to check the frpath.org website, where you can find lots of information about facilitated pathways. And once again, Mario and I would like to extend a very, very special thank you to our guests, Isabel, to Neil, to Fabricio, for taking time today to share their thoughts and experience with us. And Mario and I thank you for your interest and participation. So all our best until we meet again. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.